Our family story starts actually about 12 years ago. We have a son, 30-year-old, he's 30 years old now, diagnosed with schizophrenia at 18. It came from left field. I didn't know anything about it. Completely broadsided. I knew he had been into drugs, and I thought that maybe it was drugs that was causing this. He was seeing things, he was hearing things, he'd go in the backyard, he thought the crows were talking to him. And I took him to the pediatrician who we had seen for years and years, and he said he was depressed. So put him on an antidepressant, and it didn't help. Then one night he was at our home, we were sleeping, and a knock came at the door from the police. He had called the police on himself because he heard things coming from the TV. So they took him to Mission Hospital. They diagnosed him as depressed again and sent him home with medication. Nothing was working. And it just proceeded to get worse and worse and worse. He became very delusional and reactive towards me, and he thought I was the devil. He wanted to do away with me, and he started getting rid of my things, just taking stuff and throwing them in the trash. It just blew such a hole in our family, we just couldn't figure out what to do. So I had to get a restraining order on him and keep him away from the house. He violated that and he got put in jail. That started the revolving door, which initially I thought was a bad thing, but it ended up being a good thing for him because he was exposed to an excellent judge who had seen us in court repeatedly. She called me back in her chambers and she said, I can tell he's a good young man, but he's very sick. So we're gonna try to orchestrate getting him into jail so that we can have him assessed by an outside psychiatrist and find out what's really wrong with him and see if he responds. So they did this. We got a diagnosis first time early into it of schizophrenia, and neither my husband or I wanted to believe it. So we pushed that aside and kept accepting things like depression. That sounded milder, sounded like a more reasonable thing to accept. Eventually, his final diagnosis was when the psychiatrist from the court had intervened, and he sent a report to the judge that was sealed. She was given that. She called me back in her chambers again and said, this is what the report says. Our lowest point as a family was the very beginning. Not having any knowledge, none of us having any knowledge about this, knowing nothing and just thinking our world has fallen apart. This guy is really dangerous. Something bad is going to happen. There are 3 other children in the family, and at the time the youngest was 10. So she had all these internal fears that something terrible was going to happen, particularly to me because I was the target person, which I found out now tends to be something very real with mental illness. The church seemed silent when I was reaching out with prayer requests, because I would put them on the card saying, I have a son who is so ill, and it's his mind, and I don't know what it is. And this is in the very beginning. And I wouldn't get any response. And it felt very much like how it is in the world, where I'm saying something and nobody's hearing it. And so I just kept doing that. When there was a pastor that contacted me further down the road and said, you know what, this is an issue and we don't know how to address it, which really relieved me because I felt, oh, somebody did hear me and there is some kind of hope, even though there was nothing tangible. So that was very encouraging to me. The church has helped me in that they answered my prayer requests by offering a position for me to start a support group for families that deal with mental illness. I was extremely reticent to do it. I have always felt like Gideon, and that don't ask me to be a leader. But that was nearly 10 years ago, and it has been the best thing that has ever happened to me. In an odd way, it's sort of my life link. It's very intense, and the people that come in there bare their soul. I mean, we say stuff in there that you don't really want to record or take out somewhere and tell someone because, I don't know, it just wouldn't go, probably wouldn't go over too well. But the beauty is I've seen people come in there and they have been so down, and you can see their spirits lifted because all they do is talk, say what's going on with them, and the people around are nodding their head. And that seems to be enough for them to feel like, oh, for once, somebody really, really gets it. In my case, it has brought hope because it's strengthened my faith that God is with me, that in the silence, He's still with me. It's drawn me back to God. I know a support group for mental illness is so important. A place where people aren't judged, where they can be as real as they want to be or need to be, and be able to come out of there unburdened, at least slightly. I think that need is so great, and that so many people have no clue as to where to turn. And they want to turn to the church, but there's reticence because is there going to be judgment? Is there going to be blame placed somewhere? And particularly with mental illness, I feel like that is the first thing that happens inside a person when you have someone that's mentally ill, is you go immediately into blaming yourself. What did I do? What could I have done? And there's so many different emotions that go with it, that there's grief for the loss of what you wanted for this person in your life. And so grief support groups, anything that addresses the messy things of life. My feeling is if you can't go to church and just be real, then there's no place to go.